October rains are here with us, and these are no ordinary rains. They come from a concept called the El Nino, when the Pacific waters heat up faster than what is ordinary. Maudhui House has come to the Kenya Meteorological Department to find out what exactly happens during this period and what are the impacts, threats, and opportunities that can be derived from the El Nino.
My name is Chris. I work at the Kenya Met Department, seasonal forecaster. And recently we released an update on the upcoming short rain season. Normally we have two major rainfall seasons in Kenya. One of them being the long rain season, happens in March to May. And we also have the short rain season happening from October to December. So this coming season, we are expecting a lot of two major global drivers to be of influence. That is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, as well as the Indian Ocean Dipole. The one that is mostly known is the El Nino Southern Oscillation, where this time we are in the El Nino phase, and there has been alerts across the world indicating that we are likely to see El Nino phenomenon likely to influence the rainfall in Kenya. El Nino is not rainfall, but rather something that impacts on our weather. It involves the warming up of the equatorial Pacific, the central and the eastern Pacific. As you can see, the central and the eastern Pacific becomes warmer than average, and that brings about the El Nino phenomenon. And the impact is varied across the world. And the impacts are from drought to heavy rainfall. And we've had, for the first time in many, many years, about 3 years, the El Nino phase is coming up. And looking at the other years in the past seasons, going back up to 2019, or rather 2020, we've had La Nina, which has brought about drought. And consecutively, at least the past 5 seasons have been have experienced depressed rains, and that is why we've had drought for much of not only Kenya but much of Eastern Africa. In terms of the impact across the world, El Nino brings about rainfall in Eastern Africa, but in Southern Africa, you can see it brings about dry conditions. And the impact varies across the world. And dry conditions as well in Australia and much of the Asian countries around this region. So we expect a drought because of that. But for our region, it's a blessing because it brings about heavy rains for much of Eastern Africa. So another driver that is very impactful when it comes to the short rains, that is the October to December rains, which is a very important season, especially for the eastern sector of the country. That is central Kenya and the eastern bits of the country that constitutes of northeastern Kenya, the southeastern parts of the country, that is the lower eastern, Kitui, Makueni, Machakos, and up to the coastal region. A very important season, this coming one. And another major driver, like I've said, is the Indian Ocean Dipole, which is a phenomenon as well, just like El Nino. And it is as a result of the warming up of the western part of the Indian Ocean and the cooling of the eastern part of the Indian Ocean, which bring about that gradient, and that gradient brings about the heavy rainfall over Eastern Africa. So that is also a key factor. And whenever both El Nino and Indian Ocean Dipole occur, we are likely to see excessive rains over much of Eastern Africa. We are also looking at years which had similar characteristics as we are likely to see this coming season. And that is 1997, we had El Nino rains, a very strong El Nino of the Indies 2.4. In 2006, equally moderate El Nino. The Indies was at 0.6 as at now. And looking at 2015, we also had a very strong El Nino. Of course, the magnitude being at 2.6. As at now, the forecast is like we are likely to see the magnitude of about 2.0. Quite strong El Nino for this coming season. And that is, of course, likely to bring about significant rains to our region. Like I've mentioned, all of the global models are giving that forecast that we are likely to see El Nino developing, as well as the Indian Ocean dipole as at July, and it's possibly up to September. The index is at 1.25. The highest that has been there in the past years was in 2019. October, November, and December, the index was more than 2.3, 2.4. And for the forecast, we are likely to see above average rains for much of the country. Enhanced rainfall is likely over much of eastern Kenya because the influence is primarily the eastern part of the country. The western part of the country still gets significant rains, but they also have influence from the Lake Victoria as well as the topography. Much of western Kenya is hilly and the topography is rugged, and that brings about mesoscale systems that bring about rains, and that is why for much of western Kenya rainfall continues almost throughout the year, as they also have a small peak in June, July, and August. In terms of the rainfall performance, looking at a year that was an analog year, that is 1997, the rains were well distributed, more than average, greater than 125%, and that is the most likely situation for this coming season. Another year, of course, just going back to 1997, all our weather stations recorded rainfall that were above the long-term average. The red bar here you see is the long-term average, and for what you see that was reported during the short rain season, it was above the red bars to indicate that the rains were exceptionally good. Another analog year, of course, being 2006, and for most of these stations, you can see the blue bar exceeds the red bar, which is the long-term average. The long-term average is the figure that is calculated over a period of 30 years. And so for areas like eastern part of the country, they get rains about 200 to 400 millimeters. And so this coming season, we are likely to see that amount exceeding 200 or 400 millimeters. For the central part of the country and western Kenya, rains even reach up to 700 millimeters, or even for some areas up to 800 millimeters, especially in the western belt. And the amount that is likely to be received this coming season is likely just to surpass that amount. So the onsets are varied depending on the region or the climatological zone. For western part of Kenya, the rains are continuing from September. We've had this past week and even the week before, we've had very heavy rains in some of these parts of the country, with hail being reported as well. And that is likely to continue into October and throughout this coming season. For northern Kenya, the rains are likely to start mid of October. And for the southern and for the coastal region, we are likely to see some rains, especially this week, let's say on Friday, and maybe a short dry spell. And at the beginning of October, these rains are likely to continue. For the central parts of the country, central Kenya, that is the highlands east, again, we are likely to see the rains beginning in the second to the third week of October. For the coastal region, like I mentioned, first to second week, and for the northwest, the third to the fourth week, that is Turkana and Samburu. In terms of the distribution of these rains are likely to be well distributed, especially for western Kenya and parts of the east. But we are likely to see dry spells as well, maybe lasting just about 5 to 7 days, then rains again continue. In terms of the distribution we are likely to see the rains going into January next year, unlike the normal seasons where rains end in the first to the second week of December for much of the eastern part of the country. We are also likely to see heavy rainfall days. So heavy rainfall days, especially towards the end of October into November. November marks the peak of the season. We have the highest amounts recorded in November, and we are likely to see very heavy rainfall days, rains exceeding more than 30 millimeters, the amounts within 24 hours, and that is likely to bring about a lot of flooding, urban flooding, and also in low-lying areas around where people have settled along riverbanks. We are likely to see flooding because of the excessive amounts that are likely. In the urban areas like Nairobi and the major cities across, not just major cities, even just normal towns, if drainage systems are not cleared properly, we are likely to see flooding occurring. In terms of, you've mentioned flooding in Budalangi. At least for the past number of years, we've had very minimal cases of flooding because of the dikes that have been built. And not just in Budalangi, it's across the country where we experience flooding, especially in parts of the northeast, areas where we have these big rivers like the River Tana, Athi, and Nzoia, and Yala in western Kenya.
Tuna wasiwasi kubwa sana vile mvua inakuja, kwa sababu hatujui tutaendea wapi, kwa sababu hata mimea yetu ambayo iko nje huku hatujui itakuwa namna gani. Hata hii michele imelimwa yote itazama kwa maji, na ikizama sisi hatuna mahali pa kwenda, alafu tuanje kulilia serikali na mtu anakupa gorogoro moja, itakusaidia na nini na watoto?
What we advise locals is to work with authorities when they are told to move to higher grounds. Hopefully they'll heed to that request. And the best thing for government, or rather for those who are, especially the county governments, is to reinforce the embankments.
Waziri amesikia, hata waziri ametuona kwa TV. Yeye pia atoke na watu wake wote, waje watengeneze dike. Waje watoe hizo pesa, kodi yetu ambayo tunatoa. Waache kukula kodi na kutuambia ati wametutengeneza na hakuna kitu wanatengeneza.
Many people would ask where would we move to? But I think for us, our goal is to give early warning information so that the relevant authorities may act and be able to move people. And hopefully people will take heed, because ni afadhali kuokoa maisha kuliko kupata maafa.
Find out more at newsroom.maudhui.co.ke.